Hey guys, Andy42 here, and today we are going to talk about the listen to trigger. So, this component can really be used in a lot of different ways. Today I'm going to show you how the listen component is used to create a connection from something like this button to the lamp. Of course, there are a lot of different ways you can use the listen component, and not only with buttons, but let's see what happens if I push the button. Ha! Hands. Who would have guessed that? So yeah, the light is not going on and off. And in the end, I'm going to show you how I create this little example. But the button is doing something, he's spawning hands, and that's great. And I'm going to show you how I created this and also how we can actually turn on the lamp with something like a button. So let's dive in there. In this map here, you can see a lot of examples. Most of them use the component track to talk with the listen to trigger, but you can use it with a lot of different examples if you want to. I'm going to rely on the component track here for most of the time. Let's start off with the trigger type light. So the trigger type light will talk with the component light, and for this example I'm using the BP light intensity we have in our map here. All of the settings are inside the component light, and there we will create a separate tutorial about this one. First of all, let's turn off the trigger single and trigger constant, and you can see nothing is triggering anymore, so we have basically broken it. Let's turn on the listen to trigger single. Here you can see if we change from one section to another, the light goes on and off, and if we move it inside the section, nothing happens anymore. So we have 0 and 100 in this example, and if we cross the 50% mark, we will trigger the on state. So keep that in mind. If you have a 0 and a 1, it will trigger at 0.5, so exactly in the middle. So let's turn on the listen to trigger constant. It will transmit the values every time you drag the slider, so every tick, and you can see a nice transition for the light. And just a quick reminder, most of the time you will not turn both of them on. You can see this little flickering in the light here. So just make sure to use either the single or the constant. And as I said, all the other things are in the component light with a separate tutorial, but basically I can just turn on the transition duration to increase the smoothing of the light. So now if I cross the border here, you can see I have a nice transition from on to off, even though I'm only using a trigger single. So the next setting is our open one. It talks with the component open, and we have it in this example door here. So all the logic again is handled by the open component. We just set this to open, and we add, for example, the door here to our slider by access to trigger. And now if I hit the 50% mark, you can see the door triggers on and off, or in the case of the door, opened and closed. The next one is our active example. We have one of those in our buttons, and you can see it's using the active component here, and depending if it's true or if it is false, we play an animation, and in this time we just change the color from red to green, or the other way around, depending on the state of the active component. So you can see if I press the button, it's green, and then it turns red again. And you can also see that the door opens and closes. So in order for the button to also trigger itself, we have this little trigger also owner component we talked about in the track component, and you can check out that tutorial on our channel here. So the last one I wanted to talk about is our custom one, and this one is the most flexible one in my opinion, because you can just create basically everything you want in there. So let's set this to custom, and if I right click, I have the trigger single and trigger constant. And with them, I can really play around. So for example, let's print a string. This should not trigger because I have turned off the listen to trigger single. So now if I drag around, this upper string should never trigger. So this is working perfectly. Let's add the trigger constant. In this example, we print out the name. So now if we drag, you can see it prints the identifier drag. So this is also working perfectly. We can use this identifier to do a switch on enum. Here we can see the distance. So in this case of the slider, it's from 0 to 200. And a great example of this is this little fuse here. If it reaches the bomb, it explodes. And all of this is created with the trigger constant. So let's have a look in there. First of all, we are going to hide the spline meshes, so the little fuse lines there, depending on the position of the fuse right now. And if we reach the section with the tag explode, we're going to fire off the explode animation. So let's check this out again. If I move around the fuse, you can see the black parts disappearing or reappearing, depending on the position of the fuse. And if we get close to the section with the explode tag, it's going to explode. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more explosions in the future. So the next example is this little car here. You can see if I drag it around, the wheels are spinning, and also the scale of the meshes in the background are being changed. And I'm going to use the velocity. So if I move it fast, it will scale fast and it will rotate fast. Let's create another example here. So I have the trigger single, and let's print the name of this. So just to show you how this tagging works, I'm also going to turn off the listen to trigger constant. And now if I move it around, you can see I have my tag on and off. And if we open up the blueprint again, so just select it in the level here, select our component drag, and here we have our tags on and off for our two sections, 0 and 200, and we can change them to anything we want. So for example, let's call it test. And for 0, let's call it tutorial. And now if I hit play, I will get those two identifiers to work with. And this is really great if you have a lot of different actors and components you need to handle. For example, I can trigger this door with different actors here. So let's use the slider. You can see it's opening and closing. I can also use the button here. And I could also use things like the valves on the right or these levers. And in this case, it's really important you know what tag actually triggered the door. So the listen to trigger and the component track work together very closely, so I would also advise you to check out that tutorial. Last but not least, I promise you to show how I created the little tutorial intro in this case. Also very simple here, just a new blueprint actor I created and positioned right above me. I added the component listen to trigger. I'm using the trigger single to spawn an actor. In this case, I'm using my projectile hands. I'm getting the world transform from this actor, not this one, but this one here. And this is everything I needed. So now it has to listen to trigger, and I can trigger it with everything that can trigger. So in this case, I can use the button. I could also use a lever or a valve or the car, the drawer, everything I can actually track. And now if I hit play, you can see the results in the intro.